The air in the banquet hall was thick with perfume roasted meat, and the heavy laughter of people who wanted to be seen clinking glasses more than they wanted to taste the food. The tablecloths were white, but already spotted with grease, and the chandelier above rattled every time someone slammed their glass on the table. It was supposed to be a celebration of my father Harold's 70th birthday, a grand event with family, friends, and colleagues who had known him as a man of strength, discipline, and success. I had been there since dawn, arranging dishes, scrubbing counters, hauling trays until my arms ached, but my name on the glossy gold program did not say daughter. It said volunteer helper, as if I had been hired for a day's labor rather than born into the bloodline. I swallowed that insult like I had swallowed every other for decades. I focused on the roast beef platter still steaming too heavy for my arms, but too important to abandon. My back was slick with sweat, my chest already tight from the strain, and I told myself it was only exhaustion. But halfway across the hall, the pain sharpened a bolt beneath my ribs, pressing like a fist inside my chest. My vision dimmed and my knees weakened. I clutched the table for support, breathing shallow, praying nobody noticed. Of course someone did. Vanessa, my younger sister by 3 years, glided past in her silk dress with a wineglass balanced elegantly in her hand. Her smile widened as she glanced at me not with concern, but with amusement, the kind she saved for strangers she wanted to humiliate. A guest beside her whispered how beautiful the decorations looked, how professional the catering seemed, and Vanessa laughed as if she had done it all, gesturing vaguely toward me like I was staff in uniform. My body screamed for relief, but my family's script demanded silence, so I bit down on my panic. Until I could not. My heart lurched again, a heavy pounding that dragged the air from my lungs. I leaned against the wall, trembling, and finally forced the words out, my voice hoarse. Dad, I think I am having a heart attack. My chest. I can't breathe. I can't work. I need to sit. Conversation faltered. Heads turned. For a second, I thought the world might pause with me. Then Harold's voice cut through the room, sharp, guttural, not the voice of a father, but the bark of a drill sergeant used to obedience. Shut up! The two words cracked like a whip across my skin. His face did not flicker with worry, only irritation, as if my pain was an inconvenience, a stain on his perfect party. There's always something with you, he added louder, ensuring the room absorbed his dismissal. A few guests chuckled, mistaking cruelty for humor. One even clapped as if Harold had delivered a punchline. I felt heat rise to my cheeks, humiliation searing deeper than the pain in my chest. Then Vanessa delivered the final blow. She tilted her head toward her phone, capturing me swaying under the weight of the tray, and her voice rang with laughter. Look at her faking again! Always the drama queen. She added a mocking gasp, clutching her chest in parody, and the crowd around her burst into laughter, relieved to follow her lead. My legs buckled, but I refused to fall. I refused to give them the image they wanted, me crumpled on the floor like a spectacle. So I stood, shaking heart, thundering, face burning, and in that moment I understood the truth more clearly than I ever had. They were not embarrassed by my weakness. They were determined to erase me, even if it meant laughing at my collapse, even if it meant letting me die in plain sight. When the laughter faded back into the dull roar of conversation, I found myself clutching the edge of the counter in the kitchen, the sound of clinking glasses echoing like nails in my skull. My chest still throbbed, not with the stabbing sharpness of that first wave, but with a heavy, relentless ache, a reminder that I had been silenced in front of everyone. I stared at the dish towel balled up in my hands, damp from sweat, and I thought about how familiar that moment felt. It was not new. It was the same script I had lived since childhood, only performed now with a larger audience. The house had always been a stage where my pain was rewritten as weakness, and my silence praised as strength. My father, Harold, was a master at rewriting. When I was 9 and fell from my bicycle, my knees torn open, blood running down my shin like a slow faucet, I hobbled home crying for help. He had not moved from his chair, had not lowered his newspaper. He only grunted and pointed toward the sink where the paper towels were stacked. Clean yourself up, he said. No doctor, no comfort. just the silent decree that my pain was an annoyance, a flaw to be corrected with tougher skin. Vanessa had stood in the doorway, then her lip curled into a smirk, and muttered one word that stuck to my ribs for years: drama. She was 12, but already she knew how to echo his disdain. I remembered being 12 myself, fever burning through me, skin, clammy throat raw. The grass outside had grown high from a week of summer rain, and I begged him to let me rest. My body was weak, trembling, but his eyes had narrowed over the sports section. "You'll sweat it out," he said. "Put on a hat." So I did. I dragged the mower across the lawn, sweat mixing with fever, until I collapsed behind the garage, the world tilting sideways. Nobody came looking. Not Vanessa, not Harold. They said later it built character, that it made me strong. But the truth was it hollowed me out. It taught me that survival meant silence. That acknowledgement was a privilege reserved for my sister, the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. Even when I saved for weeks to buy a navy dress for a school dance, Vanessa insisted we take sister photos together, only to cut me out of the pictures when she said the lighting made me look washed out. She posted her solo shots online, collecting compliments, while I stared at the empty frame on the mantel where my face should have been. That erasure did not begin tonight. It was woven into every year, every choice, every memory that should have belonged to both of us. My mother had been the only one who noticed me, the only one who whispered "you matter" when no one else did. But when she died, even her voice was stolen from me. I had recorded a tribute video, a soft montage of her laughter, her gentle voice reminding me never to let them make me small. I sent it to Vanessa before the last memorial dinner, and she smiled, claiming the file was corrupted. We never played it. I had the confirmation email to proof it worked, but it did not matter. What mattered was her power to erase me again, to remove my presence from my mother's memory. Tonight was not an accident. Tonight was the culmination. My father's bark, my sister's laughter, the chorus of strangers clapping while I begged for air. They were the evidence of a long pattern. And as I pressed my palms against the cool laminate counter, I realized that every bruise of memory, every stolen moment, every silenced cry was no longer just a scar. It was a ledger. Each incident a debt they owed me, and tonight the account had come due. Upstairs, the walls felt closer than ever, the air stale with the scent of old wood polish and faint mildew from the guest room carpet. I shut the door quietly behind me, my hands trembling, my chest still aching. I wanted silence, but silence betrayed me. It left space for the buzzing of my phone in my pocket, a sound sharp enough to make my stomach clench. I pulled it out, half hoping for a message from someone who cared, half dreading what I already knew. The screen lit with a notification from an old college friend I had not spoken to in years. "Is that you in Vanessa's story?" My throat tightened. I opened Instagram, the app dragging its feet as if it knew the humiliation waiting on the other side. And there it was. The video was short, less than 10 seconds, but it played on loop, drilling into my skull. Me, bent under the weight of the roast beef platter, my knees wobbling, my face pale. Vanessa's caption scrawled across the screen in glittering font: "Every family has a drama queen. Ours just serves the beef too." She had layered circus music over the clip, the kind used to mock clowns, complete with a swelling violin. At the end, a laughing emoji bounced across the frame. My pain, my collapse, my near heart attack was a punchline delivered to hundreds of her followers who watched and reacted, with hearts with laughing faces, with comments that stung sharper than any belt Harold had ever swung. Some wrote, "She's always been like that." Others piled on with gifs of fainting actresses and cartoon characters swooning dramatically. I watched the loop again and again, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to. I needed to burn into my memory the sound of her laugh in the background, the way her voice carried, sweet and sharp, weaponized. My hands shook so hard I almost dropped the phone. I wanted to throw it against the wall, smash it into pieces, scream until my throat tore. But I did none of that. I sat there on the floor, my knees pulled up to my chest, staring at the glow of the screen, and I let the rage seep into my bones, hot and steady. For years, I had swallowed humiliation like medicine, convinced silence was survival. Tonight proved silence was nothing but complicity. My father had barked me into silence, my sister had broadcast my suffering, and the guests had laughed like spectators at a circus. But the worst part was not their cruelty. The worst part was how easily I had played my role. I had stood there frozen, calculating how to not make a scene, how to not ruin his birthday, how to not look weak. And in doing so, I had given them permission to erase me again. No more. I swiped the screen, saved the video to my phone, backed it up to my cloud. My hand steadied as I created a new folder in my Notes app, typed one word at the top: evidence. I dropped the file inside. That was the moment the ledger shifted. No longer was I just the daughter, the sister, the scapegoat. I was the archivist of truth, the one who would hold their words against them. My chest still ached, but beneath the pain, there was something new, something sharp and clear. Rage, yes, but also resolve. They thought my collapse was entertainment. They thought my voice was nothing more than noise to be silenced. They thought wrong. Morning crept in without mercy, sunlight cutting through the blinds like sharp blades across my skin. I had not slept. Not really, just drifted between shallow breaths and the constant replay of Vanessa's mocking laugh overlaid on circus music. My phone sat on the nightstand, the screen black but heavy with the weight of what it held. The folder I had created, evidence, blinked in my mind like a beacon. It was empty except for the video, but it would not stay that way. I rose slowly, my muscles aching, my chest still sore, and walked to the dresser where I kept the journal I had abandoned the day my mother died. The leather cover cracked slightly under my fingers, the pen cold against my skin. I opened to a blank page and wrote one sentence: "If they refuse to see me, I will make sure the world does." The words steadied my spine. Later that morning, a knock rattled the quiet of the guest room. It was soft, hesitant, not Harold's bark or Vanessa's theatrical entrance. I opened the door to find Aunt Lydia, her cardigan buttoned wrong, her eyes carrying the weight of decades unspoken. She held a folded square of paper in her hand. "I found this in your mother's sewing box," she said quietly. "I think she meant it for you." She placed it in my palm and left without waiting for thanks, her footsteps fading down the hall. My fingers trembled as I unfolded the paper. The handwriting was hers, looping and steady, even in her final months. "They may not see you, but I do. Do not let their blindness become your truth." My throat tightened until I thought I would choke. I clutched the letter against my chest, not crying, not anymore. This was not grief. This was fuel. I laid it carefully beside my journal and took a picture of it, storing it in my folder. Evidence. That afternoon, I drove across town to Dr. Raymond's small office behind the pharmacy. He remembered me immediately, his brow furrowed with concern. "You went pale at the party," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Your breathing was shallow, your posture collapsed. That is not something you fake. I can write a statement if you need it." The words pierced me not with pain but with validation. For the first time in years, someone outside the family saw me, believed me. I recorded his statement, scanned his signature, and placed it in my folder. Evidence. On my way home, I stopped at the grocery store. Linda, our neighbor, spotted me by the apples. Her lips pressed tight, then she leaned close. "I saw you last summer," she whispered. "Out mowing in the heat, sweat pouring down your face. You looked sick, but Harold stood on the porch and yelled at you to keep going. I thought you might collapse." She hesitated, then added, "I can tell that story if you need me to." I thanked her, my voice steady, though my chest ached with something heavier than gratitude. It was justice beginning to take shape. At home, Aunt Lydia was waiting with more than just the letter. She carried a small cedar jewelry box, the kind that smelled of time and dust. She set it on the table and lifted the lid. Inside, the felt lining was worn, but the plaque glued to the underside caught the light. The engraving read, "For Clara." Her voice was firm. "Your mother showed me this the week before she passed. She wanted you to have it." But someone had pried the plaque off and replaced it with a plate reading, "For Vanessa." Lydia had found the original tucked in the bottom of the box. My chest burned not with weakness but with fury. Even in death, my mother's final gift had been stolen. I photographed the plaque, scanned Lydia's statement, and filed it away. Evidence. One by one, the pieces collected small but undeniable. Every insult, every theft, every erased moment became a brick in the case I was building. No longer was I the silenced daughter, the invisible sister. I was an investigator, and my own family was the crime scene. The evidence folder on my laptop was no longer empty. It pulsed with life, each file a heartbeat of truth. But I knew it was only the beginning. For people like Harold and Vanessa, silence was never enough. They thrived on performance, on image, on the illusion of control. I did not have to wait long before the counterattack came. 2 days after the party, Vanessa appeared in a live stream from her carefully staged living room. She wore a pale blouse, her hair tousled just enough to suggest fragility. Her eyes rimmed with mascara, smudged to look like tears. Her voice trembled as she addressed her followers, all 200,000 of them. "We've always loved Clara," she said, clutching a tissue for effect. "She struggles with stability, but as a family, we've always tried to support her. Now she's trying to destroy us." Comments poured in, some sympathetic, others skeptical. Then, like smoke rising from a smothered flame, the clip from her party story resurfaced in the chat. "Isn't this the same sister you mocked?" someone wrote. The question gained, likes the comment thread multiplying. Others reposted the 6-second clip pairing her crocodile tears with her laughter from that night. The contrast was undeniable, and within hours, she had shut down comments altogether. But damage controlled online was not enough. Harold's weapon was the community bulletin board at the grocery store, the church foyer, the places where paper still held power. By the end of the week, laminated letters signed with his bold name were tacked to every corkboard in town. My daughter is mentally unwell. It brings me no joy to say this, but the community deserves to know. Please do not feed into her delusions. Signed with sadness, Harold Marshall. My stomach churned as I read it, standing in front of a row of milk cartons. People glanced sideways, whispering. Some nodded as if convinced. Others frowned, unsettled. The smear campaign had begun. I drove home, my grip on the steering wheel so tight my knuckles blanched, my chest thudding not with fear, but with fury. Aunt Lydia was already at the kitchen table when I arrived. Her glasses perched low, a notebook open before her. She did not ask if I had seen the letters. She only pushed a pen across the table and said, "If you want to fight, we fight smart. No yelling, just facts." Her calmness steadied me. Together we began to map it out, writing names, dates, evidence collected. She reminded me of every slight I had tried to bury. "Remember the tribute video?" she said. "You sent it. You have the email. Put it in. Remember the plaque, the doctor, the neighbor. Every piece matters." I added them one by one, each file, another brick in the wall of truth I was building. That night I could not sleep. I paced my room, listening to the clock tick, and finally grabbed my phone. I had recorded Harold's bark at the party, his voice tearing across the room like a whip. "Shut up." I saved the audio separately, labeled it clearly, backed it up twice. Then, almost by accident, I captured something else. Vanessa had come by that afternoon to fetch more decorations. She did not know my phone was recording in my pocket. As she confessed casually, I deleted that tribute file. It wasn't about Mom, it was about me. I smiled in the dark when I heard it play back. Not with triumph, but with grim relief. The mask was cracking. In the days that followed, the battle lines sharpened. Vanessa hid behind silence online. Harold behind his printed letters, but their words had already betrayed them. Meanwhile, my evidence grew thicker, my folder heavier. The confrontation was no longer a question of if, but when, and Aunt Lydia made sure I was ready. "When they come at you," she said, "do not flinch. Let the truth speak." I nodded, feeling the weight of the files, the recordings, the plaque, the letter from my mother. For the first time, I was not afraid of their voices. I was ready to make them choke on mine. The town hall smelled of lemon cleaner and old wood, the kind of scent that clung to civic spaces where uncomfortable truths were meant to be handled politely. But there was nothing polite about what was coming. I walked through the double doors with Aunt Lydia at my side, my tote bag heavy with files, my phone buzzing with reminders. The clerk nodded at me, cautious, as if already aware this was not just a family quarrel, but something heavier, something that carried the weight of community. Harold was seated in the front row. his newspaper folded neatly in his lap like armor. Vanessa hovered beside him in a crisp blouse, her phone clutched in her hand, eyes darting to every corner of the room. They both looked too straight, too composed, as though posture alone could erase guilt. I took my seat at the table in the center, the lights humming overhead, the sound of my heartbeat a drum against my ribs. The clerk called the session to order, and my voice surprised me when I stood to speak. It did not shake. "This is not just about inheritance," I began. "This is about erasure, about how power rearranges truth." I unzipped my tote and laid the envelope on the table. "Original will," I said, "signed, notarized before my mother passed. Both Vanessa and I named as equal beneficiaries." The clerk took it with gloved hands, unfolded it slowly, and the room went still. Then I played the first audio file, Harold's bark tearing through the speakers. "Shut up." His voice filled the chamber, impossible to dismiss as exaggeration. Then the second file, Vanessa's syrupy tone dripping with disdain. "She's always needed an audience." The murmurs began in the back, soft at first, then louder as heads turned toward them. Next came the jewelry box, the plaque engraved, for Clara pried off and replaced with Vanessa's name. Aunt Lydia confirmed it with her calm voice, steady as stone. Then the letter, my mother's handwriting looping across yellowed paper. "They may not see you, but I do." The room shifted, silence sharp enough to cut. Councilman Reed leaned forward, brow furrowed. "This is not a family dispute," he said. "This is a pattern." And then the twist I had not anticipated. From the back of the room, a woman stood, her voice trembling. "Ellen Simmons, former secretary at my father's firm. He fired me after my miscarriage," she said. "Told me we weren't running a charity." Another voice rose, a man in a plaid shirt. "He let me go after I sprained my ankle on the job. No comp, no paperwork." More followed, one by one, voices layering over each other. Each story another nail in the coffin of Harold's facade. It was not just my truth anymore. It was a chorus. Harold's jaw tightened, his arms crossed, but he said nothing. Vanessa's lips parted as if to spin, but no words came. Her hand twitched toward her phone, but even she knew damage control could not rewrite this room. The silence from their side was louder than any protest. My evidence had been enough, but now the community had risen too, and the weight of their testimonies crushed whatever defense Harold and Vanessa had prepared. The council clerk closed the will, her expression stern. "An investigation will be opened," she declared. "As for the altered documents, the matter will be referred to the district attorney." My chest loosened, not because the pain was gone, but because for once the truth had air. The council moved on to other business, but the room had already shifted. People glanced at me not with pity, but with recognition. One woman squeezed my hand as she passed. "You gave the rest of us permission," she whispered. I nodded, holding back tears, not because I wanted to be strong, but because strength no longer meant silence. It meant being undeniable. The ripple effect did not wait. By the end of the week, the local paper ran a front-page story with the headline, "Will Dispute Raises Questions About Marshall Family Legacy." My name was there not as a footnote, not as a helper, but as the woman who had uncovered a forged document and brought it before the council. Beneath the headline were screenshots of Harold's bulletin letters, Vanessa's live stream stills, and side-by-side clips of her mocking my collapse against her teary-eyed performance. The juxtaposition was devastating. Online, the video spread beyond our town. Strangers commented with fury, disgust, pity, and sometimes solidarity. "I know that laugh," one woman wrote. "I grew up with a sister just like her." The words cut deep, but they also stitched something back together in me. For once, my suffering was not dismissed. It was recognized. Meanwhile, Harold's empire cracked. Former employees filed a class action complaint, their stories emboldened by Ellen Simmons's testimony at the hearing. Unsafe working conditions, harassment, wrongful termination. The accusations piled up. The state opened an investigation into his business practices, freezing his assets. The man who once barked orders with a glass of whiskey in his hand now sat in silence, while lawyers picked through the rubble of his reputation. Vanessa fared no better. Her PR agency cut ties within 48 hours of the town hall hearing. Brands she had flaunted on her feed vanished overnight, issuing statements about their zero-tolerance policies. Her follower count plummeted, each drop another reminder that influence built on lies is fragile as glass. Memes flooded social media, pairing her fake tears with her mocking captions, snake emojis littering her name. Once admired for her polished veneer, she became a cautionary tale whispered in comment threads. At church, the whispers followed Harold and Vanessa like shadows. Once greeted with deference, they were now met with sidelong glances, cold shoulders, and whispered judgments. Even family friends who had laughed that night at the party avoided them. Their stillness at the town hall, their silence when confronted with truth, had branded them guilty without a verdict. Legal papers arrived within weeks. The district attorney announced an inquiry into the altered will. The jewelry box plaque, the notarized original, the audio recordings, each piece was evidence not of misunderstanding, but of deliberate fraud. Harold's silence became his loudest admission. He did not fight back. He did not apologize. He simply vanished into the background of a house that was soon listed for sale. For me, the consequence was not applause. It was something quieter, but more powerful. I could walk into the grocery store without ducking my head, knowing the letters he had posted had been replaced with the news clipping about the investigation. I could meet a neighbor's eyes without shame, knowing they had heard the recordings. The humiliation they had laughed at no longer belonged to me. It belonged to Harold, and Vanessa stamped into public record. Aunt Lydia watched the fallout with steady calm. She reminded me that justice does not always roar. Sometimes it dismantles brick by brick until the walls collapse on their own, and collapse they did. The weeks after the hearing passed like a slow exhale, not with celebration, but with the quiet unfolding of a life no longer bound by their silence. The house I had once dreaded stepping into was now emptied, its rooms hollow, its walls listed for sale to strangers. Harold disappeared into the shell of himself, refusing calls from reporters, declining to contest the investigation. Vanessa's account stayed deactivated, her once curated life replaced by a void no filter could disguise. For the first time in decades, I felt air in my lungs that belonged to me. On a Sunday morning, I brewed tea in Aunt Lydia's kitchen, the scent of Earl Grey mixing with the faint gospel tune she hummed while folding laundry. The sunlight spilling through the window did not feel harsh anymore. It felt like warmth, like possibility. I opened my journal and flipped past the pages filled with rage, past the ledger of evidence to a blank sheet. I wrote 3 words: I am seen. That was enough. But healing was not just about my pages. It was about the voices I had heard rise in the town hall, voices of others who had been silenced, erased, humiliated. So together with Aunt Lydia, I rented a small building near the church, a squat square unit with bad lighting and peeling paint. We painted the walls bright, hauled in donated chairs and tables, stocked a bookshelf with pamphlets on trauma, resilience, and survival. Above the door, we hung a wooden sign carved simply, "The Truth House." The first visitor was a man in his 50s, his hands rough from labor, his cap twisting nervously between his palms. "My daughter says I make things up," he whispered. "She says I'm exaggerating. I just need someone to listen." I told him, "You're in the right place." He stayed an hour telling stories that poured out like water through a broken dam. When he left, his shoulders were straighter. Others followed. A retired teacher pushed out for reporting misconduct. A young woman whose anxiety was dismissed as drama by her parents. A neighbor's son who hadn't spoken to his sister in years after she forged their father's will. They came not for advice, but for recognition, for a space where silence was not survival but exile. In their stories, I saw my own, and in listening, I became something I never thought I could be: solid. At night, when the building was dark and the chairs empty, I would sit by the window and reread my mother's letter. "They may not see you, but I do. Do not let their blindness become your truth." Her words were no longer a lifeline. They were a foundation. I was no longer invisible. I was undeniable. One evening, as I locked up, a teenage girl hovered by the doorway, her hoodie pulled tight, a notebook clutched to her chest. She looked up at me with wary eyes and said softly, "I think this is where I start." I held the door open. "Come in." The air was cool, the night quiet. But inside there was warmth, the kind that grows from truth, spoken aloud. Sometimes healing is not loud. Sometimes justice is not applause. Sometimes it is simply the ability to breathe without shame, to walk without shrinking, to live without erasure. That was my victory. That was my inheritance.